What's up, nation? AJ Reilly here with Paul Rochon for Beyond the Box, DSN's premier football show. And Paul, we are 1 week away from the NFL Draft. Next Thursday, 8 p.m., the first round goes live. And guess what? We will also be live for first round coverage. How you feeling about that, buddy?
I'm feeling trepidatious. I'm honestly really nervous. I don't like the spot that we're in. I kind of the same way I felt since we won that meaningless game at the end of the season to not get the number 1 overall pick. And I just knew that this was going to be an issue because why wouldn't it be for the Lions? And now it looks like there's a lot of ways that we could do the wrong thing in this draft. So I'm nervous about it, but at the same time, it's the NFL Draft. It's a time of utmost excitement. We have multiple first-round picks, which is really exciting, and we have a really wide-open team. That's the unique thing about being as bad as we are,
right,
is there's so many different directions we can go with this continuing the rebuild. So it's exciting on one hand, terrifying on another. You really don't want to do the wrong thing with the number 2 overall pick. It's a resource that you're not blessed with all the time. So we really want to try to not make a major mistake. And that's where it's like, it's a bit uneasy. And listen, you know me with this team, I'm always kind of fearing the worst. And it is set up to possibly be the worst. So trepidatious is where I'm going to leave it.
Yeah, that's not a bad feeling to have. I mean, especially with this draft, and we're going to get into that. But let's talk, if we were the GM, right, and we were talking about entering a NFL draft, what would we be looking for? What kind of philosophy would guide the way that we would go about building our draft board and building, like, our draft out, right? What kind of guides our thoughts when we go to make a pick? And I'm going to let you go first, and then I'm going to go with mine. So, like, if you were entering this draft, you got the number 2 overall pick, what kind of guides your philosophy as far as drafting goes?
Well, in the NFL, we know that efficiency is king. It's a hard cap league with limited resources to acquire talent, whether that's draft capital or cap space itself. So you have to be really efficient. And the draft is the ultimate non-exception, because the draft is where you get cheap labor. You're not getting a transcendent talent in free agency for $8 to $10 million a year like you can in the NFL draft, or even less if you get them later. We're talking top 5 pick, you're making that much money, but if you find an excellent talent in the 3rd round, you're paying them peanuts compared to the open market. So that's why hitting on your draft picks is so important, especially if you look at the way the league's trending, where we're giving quarterbacks $40, $50 million contracts, and we're giving receivers $30 million contracts. You can't do that without hitting on the guaranteed contracts of getting 4 and 5 year deals in the draft that don't come at that exorbitant cost. So it's all about efficiency. So no matter what I do, it's so much more than just talent evaluation, because even if you had a perfect track record of talent evaluation and you could nail these are the best players in the draft, it doesn't always mean that they're worth taking where they're going to go. So there's a lot of different things that play into it. And you look at, it's a prime example. The Lions have the number 2 pick. And a reason that people have been scared out of a guy, maybe Kyle Hamilton, is they said number 2 is kind of high to take a safety, especially a safety that maybe has some red flags, didn't perform as well at the combine as some people would have hoped he would. Maybe some people that get too caught up in speed, or maybe that is a legitimate red flag to be concerned about. Safety, you can probably get a little away with it a little bit more than corner. If he was a corner, I'd have a lot more concerns about his speed. You'd be flashbacks to Tease Tabor that Detroit fans, of course, know well.
Tease Tabor.
Yeah.
That's exactly what I was thinking.
But he's not a corner. He's a safety.
And the vein that popped out of your head when we drafted him. I remember
depending
that.
on when we do it, too, you guys might see that return on draft night. I really hope not. I truly hope not.
That would be brilliant.
But at the end of the day, it's about efficiency. And it's why, too, the Lions can't reach on a wild card, which you know who I'm talking about, and we will get to that a little bit more later. But that is my chief principle, is you cannot make a huge mistake. You have to nail a pick like number 2.
Yeah, and so for me, right, if I'm coming into this draft, one of my big things is how much stake I put into the actual combine itself. Because every year, it seems like after the combine, the draft boards and the big boards just change. Guys from the bottom float up to the top because they just got these insane numbers. And I get it, right? We want to test speed. We want to test strength. Those things are important to football. But you know what else is important? Knowing how to play the game. What does your tape show me? What does your film from college show me that you know how to fill your assignments, that you know how to be in the right spot at the right time based on your reads and your pre-snap reads and all those different things that are going on? Not how fast can you run, not how much can you lift, but do you know how to play football? Those are the types of guys that I really want to take, especially with a number 2 pick as high as it is, right? We can take a flyer on a combine hero day 2, day 3. I'm fine with that. But with the number 2 pick, there is no combine hero that should fill in or slot into that spot. And I don't want to be, as a GM philosophically, I don't want to be distracted by the shiny new toy, right? I don't want to be that guy that is like, oh my goodness, look at the numbers. Look at how many presses he did on the bench press. Look at how fast he ran the 40. Great. How well does he tackle? How well does he block? How well can he catch the football? Like, those things matter to me more important than the numbers that come out of the combine. And I just think too often these experts get so caught up in those few days in Indianapolis that they forget that there's an actual game that gets played on a 100-yard field that's 50 yards wide in between the white lines. And to me, that's the most important. Give me football IQ over combine numbers any day of the week.
And you mentioned experts. And experts in this case, it is not limited to just the prognosticators like Mel Kipers of the world that are trying to figure out where these guys are going to go, where they're going to be selected. These experts boil down to actual GMs and coaches that continuously fall into these traps and ignore certain red flags to make the mistakes. And that's why most GMs are not long for the job, because they can't help themselves. They see the shiny object and eventually they just go for it. And it's funny because listen, you're a big history buff, AJ. You know that if we don't learn lessons through history, we're doomed to repeat our past mistakes. This happens in the NFL so often. It's crazy to me with all the money that's at stake. You would think that we would have things down so much better now, but you hear the same adages. You'll hear a coach say, listen, I can't teach speed, or I can't teach a guy to have that kind of bend, but I can teach a guy to tackle. And a lot of times what happens here is personnel guys, they overestimate their own ability to develop a prospect. We're talking about 20 to 23-year-old kids for the most part, right? That have been playing football for a very long time for most of their cases. Some of them, if they haven't figured it out at this point, and it's not like they didn't have excellent coaching, most of them went to very good colleges with all the resources in the world to develop. If they are still struggling to do that, surrounded by better talent, getting better coaching, what makes you think you're special and you're just going to unlock something that nobody else could? Now, every situation.
Well, and I think too, Paul, like, to cut in for a minute, but like, what I think too is, like, we get so enamored by 40 speed, right? How often in a football game are you running 40 yards in a straight line?
Well, and you're not often. I do think the 40 specifically is something that fans get caught up more than personnel evaluators. Right. There's times within the 40, like your 10-yard splits, that can be can be
those
pretty
matter,
predictive.
right? Because you're talking about explosion, but like even like your 3-cone drill, I think that's more of an effective measure of somebody's like change
it's
of
the
direction
best.
And things like that. Things that matter for football, right? As opposed to that 40-yard sprint. Look, I get it, right? It's flashy. I'm glad you mentioned the 10-yard splits, because you do want to know if a guy can like track somebody down quick and how fast they can get out of their stance and explode out. I get all of that, but too often we get enamored with the numbers that are on the score sheet, and it's like, come on. What would be another philosophy for you, though, to kind of move this along? What would be another philosophy if you were approaching your war room for the draft?
So my biggest beef is teams often do not seem to adjust very well on the fly during the draft when things start to go awry. Because, listen, the draft never goes how we think it's going to go. And it's not just us as fans. It's not just the Mel Kipers and Todd McShays of the world. The teams themselves. Of course, you're surprised. Teams do things all the time out of left field. Maybe a big trade happens to shake things up. Maybe someone reaches on a player that you didn't see going anywhere near there. Maybe somebody falls.
Penei Sewell falls
crazy,
into your lap
right?
at 7.
6. I think it was 6. But regardless, yes.
It was
it
7.
7? Man, that's crazy. It's still unbelievable. It's still it's going to be one of my all-time favorite picks, the fact that Penei Sewell fell all the way to us. It's the Bengals. It's still, listen, I don't care. Jamar Chase, you know how I feel about it. They made a big mistake. I honestly it did. But that's a discussion for another day. Teams often, they'll fall in love with certain players that they expect to be there. It's something that I think Bob Quinn did a lot, and they don't adjust to how things shake out differently. And this isn't all teams and it's not all GMs, but it's something that you see a lot. Opportunity presents itself, not just before draft day in your prep, but as the draft falls. And that's where savvy teams can make trades, whether it's up or down, or whether it's just, listen, this was our draft board. These are the guys that we expected to be here, but this is a talent, maybe not even in a big position of need, but he's such a big talent that we didn't expect to be here, so we didn't even interview him, but you can't pass him up. But a lot of teams will, because they don't have the familiarity or they weren't prepared to go in that direction, so they will make a mistake and they'll take a safer guy. And this is, again, something I felt Bob Quinn did a lot in Detroit. He did it in the draft with Gerard Davis and Tease Tabor, which was the same draft, unbelievably the same draft. How many times can you make such crucial mistakes in one offseason? But listen, we could spend decades on how Bob Quinn just destroyed the team that we were building in Detroit.
For sure.
The big thing is you have to be flexible to me as a GM, and you have to be reactive to how the draft is shaking out, and don't just sit there and just wait. Be proactive. Be willing to take advantage of how things fall unexpectedly when other teams aren't always. So you have to be able to maintain flexibility and never get married to an idea.
Interesting. Here's my number 2. If I'm picking in the top 5, I'm not taking a quarterback from a small school. That's my number 2. And it's part of my philosophy as far as my theory as small school quarterbacks go. Listen, this is not, well, I guess it is discriminatory, so I guess I won't apologize for it. And there are exceptions to every rule. But it just seems like when these smaller schools play lesser competition and these guys put up numbers and they get all hyped up, a la Carson Wentz, then when they get to the big time, they struggle because they haven't really faced the competition that your, college football playoff teams, your Power 5 teams have played against. A perfect example, and we're going to talk more about this, is Malik Willis, right? He's potentially rumored to be going number 2 to the Lions. If I'm the Lions, I'm reaching for anybody else other than drafting Malik Willis because he played at a smaller school, and I don't think that he is worthy of a number 2 overall pick. And the reason I say that is I saw a quarter of football against Ole Miss this year that Liberty played, and I turned it off. I tuned in just to watch him, and I turned it off because I was like, you're proving my theory right. I'm done. I'm not even going to watch this because I know how the rest of this game is going to go. So if I'm a GM, I'm not getting caught up in the flashbang of these small school guys putting up massive numbers and drafting somebody extremely high. Like even Josh Allen, right, who I believe is an exception to my rule. He was not drafted in the top 5, if I remember correctly. He was more mid-first round. So if I'm a GM, my philosophy is I'm going to take the best player available that is not a small school quarterback in the top 5.
I believe Josh Allen went 8th or 10th overall. But that, like you said, that's kind of the exception to your rule because you could very much say that was a mistake that he did not go in the top 5 in hindsight the way he's panned out. But as we know, and as we've talked about, the quarterback is so much dependent on where you go. Maybe if Josh Allen is taken by one of those top 5 teams, he's not the quarterback that he is today. We will never know. But he is one of those smaller school quarterbacks that absolutely did pan out fantastically. On Malik Willis, he's somebody that it's not even just production because it's not like his production was otherworldly. It's the tools and the traits that these scouts and these teams are going to fall in love with. It's the huge arm that he has. It's the athletic ability that he has. Really, listen, the success, if you want to qualify it as that, I think it's been a bit overstated, but Lamar Jackson did win an MVP, right? And maybe he hasn't done much in the playoffs, but he won an MVP, and a lot of teams would kill for that at quarterback. So they see a guy like Malik Willis coming out, and they see the success that a guy like Lamar Jackson's had, and they say, you know what, we think that he can be this guy. And again, I think that's the trap, not just flexibility-wise, but falling in love with a player and ignoring a lot of potential pitfalls and red flags. And there's already so many when it comes to quarterback, but a guy like Malik Willis, just as many question marks as he has, it's not that he cannot pan out. It's not that he can't be a decent NFL quarterback. It's that it's so unlikely. I mean, the odds of any quarterback that's drafted, look at how many busts there are in the first round. The odds are already stacked against you. Then you take a guy who's from a smaller school, who didn't light up the world in the traditional quarterback skills that you would like to see, who isn't known for being able to manipulate defenses and make those reads. And again, not saying he can't develop those things at the NFL level, but that's so much risk to take a guy in the top 10.
And it's not, exactly, and that's what I'm saying. It's not worth the risk, right? With great risk does come great reward oftentimes, but I just feel like there's too many case studies of these smaller school quarterbacks that are not worth that cost in draft capital. Number 2 overall, there's no way I'm coming anywhere close to Malik Willis. Now, if he's there at the end of the first round, which he won't be, but if he's there at the end of the first round, maybe you entertain it. If he's there in the second round, you for sure entertain it. But it's like, there's so many holes in the roster, and we'll get to all this too. But like, drafting your quarterback right now is not going to be a good idea. So I don't. Just stay away from Malik Willis is basically what I'm saying, and we'll talk more about that in a minute. You got a third philosophy?
I don't really want to get into it because we could talk draft philosophy all day. You know it's one of my favorite things. But we have the rest of a show to do. I do want to say for you, I do think that you're relatively safe. I think that in an intelligent way, Brad Holmes has gone about things. Bringing Malik Willis in, letting those reports get out there. I think it's, like so many things are at this time of year, a complete smokescreen. I don't personally think there's any way in the world the Lions would actually take him at number 2. And who knows? Maybe Brad Holmes is targeting a trade back, and then maybe Malik Willis is there mid-first, and that's where he wants to take him, which, again, I still wouldn't love it. But I certainly don't think they have any intention of taking him at 2. But I think, as we've both intimated, that would be a mistake. And there's a lot of ways that this draft can play out for the Detroit Lions, and they have a lot of options. They have multiple first-round picks, as we know. We have one at the end of the first round and one at the very beginning of the first round, almost. Just right there, number 2. So many ways this can go. I want to talk about the good, the bad, and the potentially preposterous that can happen, and I will let you start. You might as well get into with the preposterous.
You want to start backwards, or you want to go with the preposterous, huh?
Well, we were already talking about him. I really don't. We really should probably start with the good, but the preposterous is right there for you.
No, you know what? Let's end on a high note. We'll start down at the bottom, and we'll end on a high note. So my preposterous, like the worst case scenario for the Detroit Lions at number 2, is drafting Malik Willis. I just got done saying this, and if it happens, Paul, you might want to duck, because I'll probably be throwing some hands. I'm not going to be happy with the fact that we have spent this hard-earned number 2 pick on a small school quarterback that we just don't know what he's going to be. Again, I don't want to write him off that he's not going to be a good NFL quarterback, but I do want to stand firm on the fact that he's not the number 2 overall pick in this draft. And to waste that pick, now let's be very clear, okay? This is the worst draft for the Lions to have the number 2 overall pick. There is really nobody worthy of that number 2 overall pick. Yes, Aidan Hutchinson is the best prospect in the draft, okay? But even then, in other drafts, Aidan Hutchinson may not even be the number 2 overall pick. There's a million ways you could kind of fleece this out. It's just a bad position for the Lions to be in. So don't make a bad position worse by drafting Malik Willis. I don't want to see it. Yes, he went to my alma mater, but I am not going to be a slappy in that way and say he's got to come to Detroit and play for my team, because I don't want him unless it is later first round, second round, which he's not going to get that far. But that is the only time you entertain the thought of even bringing him to Detroit. The preposterous for me is Malik Willis at number 2. What about you?
My preposterous also involves making a huge mistake at number 2. What would be, to me, one of the signs, and listen, the book is far from written on Brad Holmes. He hasn't been here very long. We didn't do a whole lot outlandish last year. Penei Sewell fell to us. He was the no-brainer pick, so of course you were going to take him. And he played it pretty safe in the draft. He didn't do anything dumb. He didn't do anything that you hated. I love the beefing up the trenches that he really stuck with last year, and I wouldn't mind if he kept doing the same thing this year. We talked about not falling in love with combine heroes, not falling in love with traits. The most preposterous thing I have heard in this entire lead up to the draft the last few weeks is this absurd rise of Travon Walker. I mean, people legitimately saying he could go number 1
He
overall.
could go number 1.
Which I'm going to go on record right now and saying it's not happening. Listen, if the Jags were to pass on Aidan Hutchinson, which I think is the clear-cut number 1 player in this draft, but if you want to flip it over and draft one of the tackles, whichever one you like better, whether it's Evan Neal from Alabama or not, that's also a justifiable pick at number 1. You're going to shore up your left tackle or right tackle if they're going to leave Cam Robinson at left tackle for the foreseeable future. Help Trevor Lawrence, get that young offense going. That makes sense. I can understand that. I can't imagine a world where they pass up getting a tackle, getting Aidan Hutchinson, and drafting Travon Walker, who I would not touch near the top 10. You want to talk about a combine hero and talk about a guy with complete lack of tape. This is a guy for all of his athletic traits, which, let's be real, his athletic traits, while they're special, if you look at this draft, it is full of freaky edge rushers. But people, look at the 10-yard split in the 3-cone times of Aidan Hutchinson and then tell me he's not a crazy high ceiling. I find it hilarious when people say, oh, Aidan Hutchinson's a safe player. He has this high floor. He doesn't have the ceiling of these other edge prospects. Have you looked at any film? Have you looked at the numbers? I mean, what are you basing ceiling on? Because don't tell me he's not athletic. If you take his RAS score, if you take his 10-yard split, his 3-cone time, he's as agile and has as much bend as anyone in the draft. What are you going to knock him on? His arms aren't freakishly long. It didn't stop him from racking up 13 sacks his senior season at Michigan, which, by the way, Travon Walker did not get double-digit sacks his entire career at Georgia. And I don't mean that he didn't have a season with double-digit sacks. I mean, he spent 3 years playing at Georgia, and if you combine all of his sacks, he didn't get to double-digit sacks. And mind you, last season, he played on what is arguably the greatest defense in the history of college football, stacked with first-round NFL talent. A guy that a lot of people fell in love with. You got defensive tackle Jordan Davis. Everyone says, oh, he didn't have stats because he was eating up double and triple teams. Okay, well, there's only so many guys that get that argument. Because if Jordan Davis is eating up double and triple teams, you know who's not? Travon Walker. So if Travon Walker is this freaky athlete that's going to be this elite edge rusher at the NFL level, and he was playing next to a guy eating up all the attention, where are the numbers, dude? Where's the film?
Didn't they say though that Balky, the GM in Jacksonville, kind of falls in love with guys like Travon Walker?
To God.
So maybe
this is something I've heard a lot.
Maybe
and people reference Balk. He drafted Aldon Smith over J.J. Watt. Listen, Aldon Smith was a great player outside of his off the field issues and the issues in his head, but he wasn't J.J. Watt. We can look back, and at the time, we thought J.J. Watt was a better prospect. And in hindsight, wow, J.J. Watt was the much better pick. You would think that he would learn from something like that, because I honestly think J.J. Watt is a great comparison NFL comp to Aidan Hutchinson. I think that's a really good one. You'd think as a GM, and he's been around the league a long time, he will learn from his mistakes and not fall for the flash. But listen, Aldon Smith, I at least thought was going to be a darn good NFL player. I think Travon Walker is such a wild card. Yes, he could develop, but you're not drafting at number 1 or 2 overall on he could develop. I need to see something, at least with like Kayvon Thibodeau. He was the number 1 prospect for what feels like a couple years before he slid a little bit recently. He has elite traits, but he did put a lot of stuff on film, even though it wasn't consistent. Maybe he didn't play with the motor that you thought. Maybe mentally or maturity, you're not sure if he's a perfect fit for your team, but at least I've seen a lot with him. Whereas Travon Walker, I see a dude that played on an absolutely loaded team, has all the athletic talent in the world, and has no production to match. And you want to draft this at number 2? Are you honest to God? Like, in the top half of the first round, I am apoplectic if we make this pick. There are so many better directions. I would rather take a lower athletic profile guy like George Karlaftis out of Purdue, who I think is going to be a good NFL player. I don't get it. Honestly, I don't get the hype. I will be... Personally, as many times as I make fun of GMs and say that they make these stupid mistakes, I will be surprised if Travon Walker goes in the top 5. I will, because I don't think NFL GMs are that out of touch. I think this is a hype, a more of a media and a fan hype than reality. And maybe I'm wrong. Maybe these guys are just, they're like, you know what? I'm pushing my chips all in when I don't need to, and I'm going to make the riskiest pick imaginable. For me, if the Lions did it, it would be preposterous, and I would be almost entirely out on the Brad Holmes tenure, because you can't make mistakes like that with treasure of the number 2 pick. You cannot do it and survive long as an NFL GM. You have to nail those picks. So to me, that is the preposterous. Would you like to tell me, on a lesser note, what would be bad from the Lions?
So, yes, I can, but I want to preface it by saying I can live with it if this happens, though I will not be happy about it, okay? And the bad for me is Kyle Hamilton at number 2. All the talk about this generational talent in the back end of the defense, all the attributes that he brings, big body, right, good athleticism, all that kind of stuff. Taking a back end safety for your defense and paying him number 2 overall money, to me, is just bad financial juju. It's not going to go well for you. And so for me, drafting someone like a Kyle Hamilton at 2 is a bad move. It's not preposterous like drafting Malik Willis, but it is bad in the sense that if you were going to draft Hamilton, then look for a trade. Even if that trade isn't of the value that a number 2 pick would be, you can still move back a few spots and probably still get Hamilton in that sense. And in that case, I'd be much more happy about it. But drafting him at 2 with no offers or not trading down or anything like that is just an absolute... I could live with it. I'm not going to be happy about it. But there's way better options to go than to draft that back-end safety at number 2. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I guess I should have went first when talking about the bad, because you just said everything I was about to say, down to the player himself and the reasoning. I guess I'll add a little bit onto it. Kyle Hamilton is the perfect example of something that would be a poor decision-making to me at number 2. For the things that we talked about, it's all about efficiency.
Could you live with it,
Could
though?
I live with it? I mean, I
In
think
the way that
a
I
high-end
prefaced it.
safety is more valuable than a lot of people do. People have really devalued safety, and I actually don't mind paying a safety the, $9 million a year that he's going to get. I mean, we just paid Tracy Walker $8 million per over 3 years. Brad Holmes doled out, which probably a bit of an overpay, but we just did that for him to be a safety that we don't think is the caliber that Kyle Hamilton's going to be. The problem is it's all about value. So you're not getting value from a number 2 pick drafting a guy like Kyle Hamilton. And listen, the 40 times not everything. 10-yard splits, agility times. Kyle Hamilton is very large for a safety. He's like 6'4". He's a big dude, 220 pounds. He's not going to run a 4.2. It's not realistic. But there are some red flags and there are some concerns there. And one of my concerns actually, and it's ironically, because this 40 time has just eclipsed everything. It's eclipsed all the talk. It's like, oh my God, he runs a 4.6. You can't take him in the top 5. Which again, not my hill to die on. I don't love it. Of course, I would have liked to see him run a 4.45. That would have been wonderful, and he would have cemented himself as a top 5 pick. He didn't. That's reality. He's not super fast, but he does play pretty fast on tape. A concern that I have is Kyle Hamilton is not a very good tackler. And he hasn't been. He hasn't been in all of college. He's whiffed on a lot of tackles, and I need a guy that can come clean up. If you're the last line of defense, and I need you to make a stop to not allow a touchdown, I need you to be able to do that. And it's great when you're rangy and you can just break up the pass and not have to rely on that. But when they break a big outside run and you're the last line of defense, I need you to be able to save a touchdown. And many times at Notre Dame, he showed, not that he's completely incapable of it, but he whiffed a lot of tackles. That's a little concerning for me. Now, that's a secondary concern. You're a safety. Your read, your react, your ability to play the pass, those things are more important. But I'm picking a guy at number 2. You take that along with maybe some athletic questions. And I'm not saying he's not an athlete. He's actually a great athlete. You look at his broad jump, his vertical, at his size. He is a very good athlete. You just have some speed concerns, which I think are, at this point, a little overblown. We've gone too far with it. But again, we're talking the number 2 overall pick. He has too many flaws in his game to me to take at number 2. And furthermore...
Right, and you want him to be able to have that whole package. Of course. And if he doesn't have that whole package, then it's not worth a number 2 overall pick.
On the flip side of this, you can say, okay, well, I think he's going to be a stud. I think he's going to be one of the best safeties in the NFL, so I would take him at number 2. The issue with this is then it becomes, even if you have the foresight to know that, it becomes a position of draft value. The fact that you could trade down and probably get him, and even if you trade down and he's gone, you're going to get a comparable prospect, one that I will talk about a lot more next week. You know that there's a corner that I like a lot in this draft, and it's not Sauce. I think there's plenty of other prospects in that similar grade range where you can trade back, get the capital, not dole out that contract, not take the risk, and maybe still get him. And even if you don't get him, you can get someone else that is going to have that same potential. It's just a reach, and I don't want to reach when it's so important to be efficient, especially when you have the number 2 overall pick. And listen, I know a lot of people don't believe a trade's going to be there. A trade will be offered. Somebody's going to want to move up. It might not be for a haul. You might not be getting offered multiple first-round picks because maybe they don't value the tackle that they're trading up for that highly. They're not trading up for a quarterback at number 2, so maybe the value's depressed a little bit. But somebody's going to want to get ahead of another team to get somebody. There's going to be somebody they covet, whether it's the tackle of their choice, whether they really like Travon Walker or Kayvon Thibodeau. Somebody's going to want to trade up for their guy. It all becomes a question of how much are you getting in return, and is it worth it to trade back? And I would argue that it's worth it at almost any cost. You're going to get a little bit extra draft capital, and you're not going to have to dole out the same size contract because contracts drop pretty fast as we go through the early parts of the first round, and that money does matter down the line. Not that money should be, listen, you want to get the most talented players. Money cannot be your complete driving factor, but it's all about efficiency in the draft. And taking a guy like Kyle Hamilton at number 2 is not efficient, and it's not just because of the position he plays, it's because he's not a surefire, complete talent. And listen, I think there's a safety that's going to be available mid to late first round that could have just as good, if not better, of an NFL career. And that's another reason I don't want to take that guy at number 2. I think it would be bad. We've had a lot of negative things to say. A lot of ways the Lions can mess up this draft.
Hold on a second. That safety at the end of the first round, did he wear the maize and blue last year?
He may have. And he may not have the athletic limitations that another safety does. He may have been used a little bit out of position, out of necessity at Michigan. That may have masked how good he can be at the NFL level. But we're going to talk a lot more about that next week at our super draft prep show. I don't want to get deep into it. I'm just saying there's options out there. You don't need to take Kyle Hamilton at 2. It would be bad. We've talked a lot about bad.
Do I know you like the back of my hand?
I've talked about it a lot.
Oh my goodness.
I've talked about it a lot. There is not, hey, we did the show on Ojabo. I believe it was me and you, right? And I'm not a fan of Ojabo. I don't think that we should be touching him in the first few rounds. So it's not a Maize and Blue thing. There's a lot of people. Listen, Maize and Blue fans right now think that Ojabo's a steal at the end of the first round. I completely disagree with that. We got a fourth.
Yeah, we're not getting into that,
4-3
though.
safety on the board that may have some special untapped talent. Okay, no, listen. Let's talk about the good. Let's talk about the way that the Lions can do good in this draft, especially as it pertains to number 2, which is really the big thing, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously, throw the Captain Obvious costume on me right now, but it's entirely dependent upon what the Jacksonville Jaguars do at number 1. So let's, for humor's sake, say that they take their tackle at number 1. The good is you draft Hutchinson. Case closed, right? But if they draft Hutchinson number 1, then the good is you do everything you can to get out of number 2. That's the only good that there is, in my opinion. Now, I know you're going to go a little bit different way, so I didn't want to steal your thunder on that one, but I still believe, even though you make a good case, and you're going to make a good case, that trading out of that number 2 position is the best thing that they can do if Hutchinson is off the board. Trade down, trade back to 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, even later into the mid-first round, and get that draft capital that you need. If a team is not offering you what the number 2 overall pick is worth necessarily, it doesn't necessarily matter, because you're still adding draft capital that you can hit on later and make an impact on your rebuilding team, rather than settling, and I'm going to use that term accurately, settling for a player that you feel like you have to draft at number 2 when you could have accrued a little bit more capital, even if you don't get the value that you think it's worth. So if they take their tackle, the good is Hutchinson, case closed. If they take Hutchinson number 1, then in my mind, the only good thing you can do is anything and everything to get out of the number 2 overall pick. You have to.
You're right. You're 100% right. But I'm going to expound on this a little bit, and I'm going to say the best thing that they can do is not taking a not top-tier player at number 2. Obviously, Aidan Hutchinson.
That would be settling. That's what I'm saying.
Aidan
right?
Hutchinson is going to be our first example. If he's there, he's a no-brainer. You take him. He's the best prospect in this draft, and I will fight everyone for it. I mean, we already got into the Travon Walker stuff. Aidan Hutchinson had a faster 3-cone time. Aidan Hutchinson had the same 10-yard split. I don't want to hear about Travon Walker's athleticism. No, Aidan Hutchinson is by far the best prospect in this draft, bar none. He has the production, the film, the everything. I don't think he's going to be there. I think it's more than likely that he's not there at number 2. Now, it's not like a 1 in 20 to me. I think there's like a 25% chance that Jacksonville goes in a different direction. Not Travon Walker, but maybe they take one of those tackles. But as you said, that's the obvious good. We're not playing obvious. So who else makes sense to actually select at number 2? I'm all about trading down. But what if the trade down's not there, or we just don't see the value? I don't want to take a quarterback. I don't want to take the Kyle Hamiltons of the world. Sauce Gardner, listen, I think there's a better cornerback that's going to be available a little bit later. I don't want to take him that early. And listen, I think Lions fans may actually internally combust if we take another corner in the top 3. And I love corners, and it's not Okuda's fault that Bob Quinn's a bum. It's really not. It's just like it's not Ebron's fault that he went number 10 overall. Like, at some point, GM's got to be held accountable. Like, the players don't pick themselves, right? But Lions fans, if we take Sauce Gardner at number 2 overall, it's not going to go over well. It's going to be really bad. So who am I? There seems to be somebody that I'm leaving out, though. And that would be the aforementioned people that Jacksonville passes on to select Aidan Hutchinson. For me, it's Evan Neal. And you might be sitting here, well, wait a second. We drafted Penei Sewell last year. He's been pretty darn good. He's a very promising rookie. And we got Taylor Decker on a pretty good contract on the other side of the line. Why would we draft another tackle? And I would say because it makes sense. Because one, it's best player available. The surefire guy that I know that's going to be good, that is actually worthy of a number 2 overall pick, is Evan Neal. Or you can go with the NC State tackle that a lot of people love. I like Evan Neal because I love his size, and I love the fact that he's a two-way blocker. Run blocking is extremely important to me. I don't want just a pass blocker, which is part of my beef with Taylor Decker despite his best year of his career last season. And you say, so what are we going to do with Taylor Decker? We got to trade Taylor Decker. The good thing is, because he's a pass-blocking left tackle, he's something that is highly coveted in the NFL. So highly coveted. People, these are rare commodities. There's not enough good left tackles to go around and protect your quarterback's blind side, provided that he's a righty. He's a pass blocker. He's not a road grader, but he's like a top 15 in NFL eyes, at least left tackle. That's going to net you a first-round pick easily, like a mid-first. It could net you even more, but I'm going to be conservative and say it nets you a first-round pick between 17 and 23, which I think you will get in your sleep. So now we're going to trade Taylor Decker. We're going to get another first-round pick, which is fabulous. We're going to take a massive behemoth of a tackle to throw on the right side of the line and move Sewell back to the left where he belongs. And you say, okay, well, we traded Decker, and then we replaced Decker. That's cool. Now what? Well, now we got an extra first-round pick. And not only do we have an extra first-round pick in the middle of the first round, but we got Decker's salary off the books. I don't know if you know this. Taylor Decker's making like $16 million a year. It's a ton. It's way too much money for what he is. He is not a good enough two-way blocker, despite having a decent season after injury last year. He's just not. If I can take that mid-first-round pick and I can get a guard, and now all of a sudden, if I've done my homework and I've done a good job in the draft, I now have two stalwarts on the offensive line by getting rid of one. And I'm paying them combined much less than I was paying Decker alone. This is a huge efficiency win for the Lions. I now have 5 years of these guys. I have Frank Ragnow, who is a very good pick at center. I have Penei Sewell, who looks like a legitimate franchise tackle, who I took last year. In a couple of years, I might have the Cowboys offensive line from a few years ago. An offensive line that can completely carry a team because it's the best in the NFL, and I can do whatever I want on offense because I have a truly elite unit. And when I want to run the ball, they can move bodies in the run game. When I need to pass the ball, they can protect the quarterback, and they can allow me to do things even if my receivers or my running backs or my quarterback is a little subpar. I have a chance that if Aidan Hutchinson, the easy thing's not there, and a trade down isn't there, that I can go a little bit outside the box, do the unexpected thing, and try to turn one of my most important unit really into the best in the NFL. What better way to expedite the rebuild than within a couple years, I have the best offensive line in the NFL. And then when it's time to go get my replacement quarterback, because obviously Jared Goff is not the answer to replace Matt Stafford, whether it's a rookie or a veteran coming here to try to win after the rebuild, now I have a really good home for him. I have an offensive line in a position that he can thrive in and grow in and be protected, and I can have a balanced offense. So if Hutch isn't there, and if the trade down you want isn't there, this is where you have to adapt to the draft. This is where you have to be flexible as a GM. And you can do the great thing of, I am going to make a decision that's unexpected. I'm going to take a tackle. I'm going to draft Decker. I'm going to just make my line so good. And listen, it might not work out. Maybe Evan Neal's a bust. Maybe the guard you take's a bust. Things happen. But that's the draft. You have to play the odds, and you have to try to do this as efficiently as possible. And the good to me is the Lions don't make a mistake of reaching at 2, and they do something that makes sense from efficiency standpoint in the draft. That's all I want. That's all I ever want. Because if you follow that process, you will have more success than failures. And if you don't, you're never going to be long for the job, Brad Holmes. You're just not.
Well, I mean, next Thursday is going to be a good test of year 2, Brad Holmes, his second draft. Is he going to be celebrating like he did when Penei Sewell fell into his lap? That is yet to be seen, but I'm hoping for it. And I'm hoping that he is as smart as we think we are and will do what is the right thing, not get sidetracked by the flashiness. And hopefully, next week, Everybody will be able to join us for our first round live coverage of the entire first round of the NFL draft. It's going to be Paul, probably with veins popping out of his head at some point, maybe even walking off set. Who knows? But it's going to be entertaining, and we do know that. And Paul, I know that you're trepidatious. I am excited at least to hang out and get in a room together and be able to talk about all of this together with some of our buddies. But for tonight, we're a week away, and that is, we've laid out our philosophies, we've laid out kind of our good, the bad, and the preposterous. We're going to see what happens next Thursday. So for Paul Rochon, I am AJ Reilly. This has been Beyond the Box, and we'll see you next week for a bigger pre-draft show.